Hi, I am Madeline James, and today we are going to be talking about projections. And this is sort of a part of my global world building guide, sort of a side accompaniment, if it would, but yes, so let's get into it. One of the biggest complaints or problems with drawing 2D global maps, as I do, is distortion. Short of mapping on a 3D globe, that is going to be a problem. Any flat representation of a globe is going to be distorted to varying degrees at different locations. There are two main types of projections, those that preserve one property and sacrifice the others, and those that are a compromise. Some projections distort area and make land masses in different parts of the globe disproportionately sized. For example, the Mercator projection, which makes Greenland look bigger than South America when it is actually 8 times smaller. Maps that preserve area do so by distorting form and distances and are usually called equivalent or equal area projections. Some projections distort form so they look twisted, stretched, squished, or even unrecognizable. For example, an azimuthal equidistant projection. Projections that preserve local angles also preserve form and are typically called conformal projections. Form is preserved by sacrificing area and distance. All projections distort distances to some extent, for example, an equirectangular, but some preserve distance in relation to specific points, typically the center. Area and form are sacrificed to achieve this, and these projections are called equidistant. Now, there are two main categories of maps that we are concerned with: those that preserve one of the 3 properties we mentioned, and those that find a compromise between them. This gives us equal area projections that preserve area, conformal projections that preserve form, equidistant projections that preserve certain distances, and compromise projections that sacrifice a little of all 3 but keep distortion overall limited. Now, some people may choose to draw their plates and landmasses in a 3D globe modeling software and then export that into a flat map projection. Some prefer to switch back and forth between an equirectangular projection and a globe to frequently correct for distortion. I prefer to keep everything in 2D until I finish my global maps. Whatever process works for you is fine. I roughly use an elliptical or basic mole weld projection for our sample maps, but I now prefer a Robinson projection as it tends to make the following process easier, and it is a good compromise projection. So, equirectangular projections are maps stretched out into a rectangle, so the poles in particular are going to be much wider east to west than they actually are. This is a very common projection to use if you are working digitally, although I find that this projection has very distorted forms, especially near the poles, which I struggle with. As I work with compromise projections, I personally don't worry too much about distortion other than making sure the edges of my map will work out. I usually avoid having land masses cross the 180-degree longitude lines, aka wrap over, and I try to have land masses either fill up my poles like Antarctica does on Earth, or I don't put any land masses on my poles. However, when I move on to making regional or local maps, I want to have maps that avoid as much distortion as possible, especially because I like to use distance scales to determine travel times, and this is important. The best way to do this is with different projections specialized for the size and shape of your area of interest and your purpose. My software of choice for doing this is G.Projector, but in order to import a map, you need a rectangular projection. If you use this distortion initially, then you can skip the first step in this guide and skip to creating your projections. If you used an elliptical or Robinson type projection like me, do not fret. I will show you how to turn this into an equirectangular projection for importing into software like GProjector and GPlates. Alright, so I have Photoshop up, and what I'm going to do is walk you through the process of basically taking a map that is not a rectangular projection and turning it into a rectangular projection. Again, this isn't going to work for like every map in theory, but anything that's like a Robinson projection or like more of an ovular map like I use, anything in that sort of category, this is what we're going to use here. And as a quick disclaimer, this is not going to be like the world's most perfect process in terms of like being neat and tidy, but we will get there and we will have a new like base map for you to work off of. So the first step is to create our new document. So I am just going to call this new rectangular projection. I'm going to leave this in the 20 by 10. A 2:1 ratio is going to be great. Square pixels, all of this is fine. Create. Let me save. All right. So now what I'm going to do is drop down another layer. I'm going to pull up Okay, I'm going to pull in a new file. So I want this one. And this is from my, I think I made this in my cultural world building guide series where I re-added back in the detail that I had in my original maps. When I was redrawing these over and over, I simplified all my land masses, which I think is mostly what I used for the majority of my like global world building process. But I'm gonna roughly center this, roughly change it so it fits. It doesn't really matter, but then I'll click out. And then I just have my new map on a layer. Easy peasy. So if you have your map as physical, you can like scan it in to drop it in here, whatever process you need to use, but you know, just use whatever file works. And I do, for my own stuff, use a topographic or like elevation map for this, but for this purpose, I decided to just go here and use this and it's fine. So now with your map layer selected, go edit, transform, distort. And what you're going to want to do is pull your edges over to the edge of the map, which is going to take a few tries because it's going to keep like waffling back and forth. And just make sure you're not skewing it, so make sure it's 0 degrees of on that little warp icon that you see there. There we go, right there. And we're almost there. Just a little bit more. Boom. And that'll work. And then actually I want to pull this up just a little bit. Yeah. Click the check button and there we go. So now the tops and the sides meet the edges of our canvas, which is what we're looking for. And now what we want to do is add latitudinal lines across this. I only have a few here, as you can see. I have them at 0, 30, 60 degrees, and we're going to want a lot more. I like to have them every 10 degrees. So what I'm going to do is just, I'm going to click the line tool. I am going to choose this like, let's go with like a really light blue color. I think that'll actually work better. We'll go like there. That'll work. Stroke somewhere around 7 pixels is fine. And then I have rulers turned on right now. So I can sort of see on the side here where the line is. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag this all the way across and making sure it is 0 degrees. And you will notice the maps on the lines on the map I drew are not perfectly straight because I hand drew them, and that's fine. So then I'm just going to copy and paste them and move our lines. Hold on, let me go down here, lock my main layer, go back to this other one. And I'm really bad at doing this, but we'll get there. And I'm just going to add these every like so many, come on, there we go. Every 100, 200 I think is what this is, every 200 pixels. Okay, so now I have latitudinal lines here. It doesn't really matter what latitudes they are as long as they are straight across. And I'm going to create a group. I'm just going to call this lines. And I'm going to move all of my lines into that group. And then I'm sure there are easier ways to do this if you actually know how Photoshop works, but I'm going to right click on lines, merge group, and now it's a single file or a single layer. And what I'm going to do, because you kind of want the lines to be the same in your reference layer, which is this one, and the ones on your map. So I want duplicate. So I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to call this one like reference. And in my reference layer, I'm going to edit, let's see. Adjustments, brightness, contrast. I'm just going to up the contrast. Is that what I want? Hold on. Let me just have my reference lines. We'll just do levels. And essentially what I want to do is make these darker if I can. There. We'll do that. So now they're a little darker than these lines. Not a lot, but just a little bit. So then my lighter lines, I'm going to put those in a group with my main map. I'm going to make sure the lines are above my other map so that if I hide the reference lines, I can still see these lines, right? Whereas if it's below it, I will not be able to see the lines, right? So I want it above. And then I'm going to right click on the group and I'm going to merge group. And so now I have my lines reference layer and I have my actual map layer, which we can call this map. Okay. So now what we want to do is, oh, I should have done this before I did this. We'll just do this real quick. I want to add another vertical line right here in the middle. Make sure it's 90 degrees exactly. Okay, great. I'm gonna copy paste that. And then I wonder if I can just select those two, right click, merge layers. There we go, that's easier. Merge layers. Okay. So this is going to be our reference lines layer. And then this is going to be our map layer. There we go. So what I want to do now is we are going to start a puppet warp. So select your map layer. Let's see, edit, transform, no, where it is, no, just edit, puppet warp. That's gonna pop up, all your settings appear, mode, normal's fine, density, we want more points, 2 pixel expansion is fine, and then don't click anything else yet, and you'll see, I had to click and go back to make it show up, but like you can see your icon is this little like push pin. And when you click right at the tip of the push pin is where you're going to get an anchor point. First, we want to make anchor points all the way down this prime meridian everywhere it intersects with a latitudinal line. So I'm just going to go through and pop those on. Okay, So now you're going to go through on the sides too, and you're going to make them along every single latitudinal line where it intersects with the edge of your map. So I'm just going to go in and do that real quick. Okay, so now in your second and third most poleward latitudinal line, so that's going to be this one here and this one here, I want you to add another one in between. So just right there, right there, right there, and right there. Great. And now you're going to add two more in the most like poleward segment. So you're going to add ones like sort of where that curve stops being as close to a straight line. So like for me, I'm going to click like right here and about right there. And we'll go with right here on this side and right here. And then just add another one partway from an up and down perspective. So like covering the rest of the latitude there. Okay, so now what we want to do is every single one of those lines, or anchor points, we want to drag it to the outside. So I typically start from the equator on one side, work my way to the corner, then go to the other corner, and then I do the other side. And you're going to do every single one of these until you're done. It's going to look weird. There's going to be some twisting and warping, but we are going to fix that. So just go through and move all these over. And these are what our reference lines are for, so that you can sort of see where you are and make sure that you're keeping these as level as possible. So just go across and do all of these. Okay, so that's what I sort of look like with just these first set of lines. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from my equator, because your equator should be kind of the most correct. And I'm going to add a few more anchor points and just kind of pull it back to where it needs to be. So I'll kind of start like right there, and I'll pull it back up to that line. I'll do the same thing over here and just tuck that down just a little bit. And try and get that equator line looking pretty good. And like, don't go crazy with the anchor points. Like, don't add more than maybe like 5 in a segment over here, just because it's all gonna get a little bit like tweaked, and you can always come back again later, right? So I just like to kind of go across and tweak all that up, and then work my way down. And starting either side is fine, but equator to the pole, and just kind of do that around your map. Okay, so I am pretty happy with this. I think it looks pretty good. I didn't bother tweaking like these upper corner bits, because like they're not really messing with anything right now. So now I'm just going to click the check button to accept my puppet warp. And I now have my map. I can hide my reference lines. And we're left with this. Now, this might be fine for you, in which case, great, go for this, use this, export this, just carry on. If you want something that looks a little bit nicer, which we'll go here just because this is like a nice example, and I want you to be able to kind of see the projections really easy for my examples later, I'm going to go over this and make a layer where I'm just tracing all the lines. And for, if you have like a proper Robinson projection that you were using before, which I use in my personal world building project that I'm going to show you some examples of down below. I just left it at what I exported basically, minus the vertical line. I didn't use a vertical line in that one. But I had a higher quality for that because again, this may surprise you, but I don't actually put that much effort into my example maps because again, I'm not using them for anything. They're just so that I can be like, look, I did a thing and it kind of looks like the thing, right? So I'm going to go through and trace this. I'm going to use my tablet just to make another layer, and then I'm going to export that. And if you're curious, basically just file either quick export as PNG or export as, and then just, you know, put the information you want. But yes, I'm going to go do that now. Alright, so what I did here real quick is I just put the transparency down here and then I drew over the lines, which then looks like that. And I decided to have a little bit of fun because, again, I would normally use like a topography map or something, elevation map, some things that you can use it as a reference to kind of link back to your other maps. But for our example, I thought it would be fun to just have green and blue, just for funsies. So I'm going to export this. Let's pull this back down here. PNG 3000 by 6000. This is honestly bigger than you need, but it's fine. I'm going to export. Saved. Okay, so these maps here are just kind of showing you an example from one of my personal world building projects, which started with a Robinson projection, used a topographic map. I already had all the lines on here, and it was a much higher detail level than on the normal ones that I make for this world building guide. So you can sort of see if you start here, you don't have to redraw everything. All right, so I'm going to show you GPlates really quick. And technically, GPlates is a plate tectonics program, and you can use it to build, you know, the tectonic history of your world. There are a lot of guides that do this. I recommend World Building Pasta, or part of Artifactsian's World Builder's Log goes through using this. They're very great, but I don't personally use any of those features for this. They are complicated, and I find them scary. But if all you want to do is check your map for distortion in a 3D space, something really easy to, you know, pop in and out, GPlates is a pretty popular tool to use, and this could be sufficient. So it would let you skip GProjector entirely if you don't actually need to export any complicated projection maps or regional maps or anything like that. It's user-friendly, you can rotate it in 3D space, all of that. But I'm going to pull this up. There is a GPlates site that includes the download and all the installation instructions. I'm not going to explain to you how to like install it. Just follow the instructions there. And yeah, once you open it, I'll show you what to do. Okay, so really quickly, this is GPlates. It's a pretty basic software you can open up. You can rotate your world. Sorry, I'm in GPlates. And I'm going to import raster, and I'm going to open up. Okay, so I'm importing my file. I'm just hit next, next, whatever, great. Super basic, and then I have my world map in GPlates, and it looks fine, you know. Could maybe tweak that a little bit just to make it a little bit less of a dip, but also it's fine. This all looks perfectly good. I have no issue with it. Actually, I think that's Is that where the edge of the map is? I don't even know, but yeah, it's pretty cool. And then you can view, set projections, and just play with some regular ones. So back to our rectangular projection, we can look at Mercator, which is weird. We can go to a Moleweed. Great. That's similar to where we started. And we can look at a Robinson. And that's all handy dandy. And you can go through and do all sorts of crazy stuff in here. Like, this is like a whole thing. But yeah, I mean, if all you're looking at is to tweak like your land masses to make it look correct and fix distortion based off how you did your map, or you just are curious, this can be a perfectly fine way to do it. And you can even go through in 3D orthographic and you can zoom in. And if your map's detailed enough, like, you could always just use that reasonably well enough. It's sort of like looking at an orthographic projection. It's very similar because it's just 3D orthographic, right? But that's a good basic feature. So I'm going to open up G.Projector now. Okay, so I really, really love G.Projector. I think it is a lot of fun. It is a map projection explorer by NASA. And there's a download page and a user guide and all of that, which is going to be linked in the blog, but you have to have a JRE or a Java runtime engine to run it, which, you know, if you don't know how to do this, look up a tutorial online. I think that'll be the most complicated part for you. I obviously already have all of this because I do like code occasionally on my computer, and I will trust you to follow all of those download instructions. But G.Projector, I think it has over 200 different types of projections, and it has a lot of different settings that you can tweak to sort of fine-tune those projections. It can import a number of different map types, but the one we're using is an equirectangular projection or a cylindrical equidistant projection. Yes. The tool is not intuitive as much as the GPlates is, but I find that you get the hang of it really quickly. It's honestly not too bad, but before we even talk about what types of projections you want to use, I'm going to give you a little walkthrough of G.Projector, setting the lat long lines and how to export maps, and then we're just going to kind of step out of G.Projector and I'm just going to talk about projections and show you some example maps that I generated with it. Alright, so here we have G.Projector. And basically you have to open this with your projection file. So like I just clicked my rectangular file and opened it. And then we're in here. You can't like just drag and rotate the world like you can in GPlates, but you can adjust where we're centered. So we can change this to like 180 and it'll rotate. So I like to start by setting my graticules. These are your like lat long lines. So I like to do long dashes, white. I just leave them like this. The spacing is 15 degrees right now. So these are all 15 degrees, which I like, I think works fine. And it's starting in an orthographic projection. That's kind of your default here, but you know, that's kind of how it works. And then if you want to export something, you do File, Save Map As, change your map name and all of that, and it works. So now that you kind of have an idea of how it works, I am not going to like manually walk you through creating every single possible map here like this, but I can sort of go through and show you like an example of some of them. You can see your equirectangular here, and again, I'm centered on 80 right now, but like you can change this to be whatever you want. This is weird looking. But yeah, you can basically get whatever you want there. That's a good one. Moleweed is interesting. This is with interrupted consonants. Uninterrupted, it looks like this, but this one's kind of cool for my map. It works. There's also the, where is it? Robinson again, just, you know, and you can export this. You can center it wherever you want around here. But then if we want to get into like superconsonants or consonants, a good example is our azimuthal, and then you can either do like equal area or equidistant, depending on what you care about the most. So Here we go. So if I click equal area, I get this. And if I want to center it on a continent, I can do -150 and we'll do 30 degrees north. And now we're centered on this continent here. And I can reduce our edge angle. Say, ooh, that's a bit much. You know, there. And now I have a, you know, view of this in azimuthal equal area. And this definitely works. It's probably not the right map for this specific area, but that's just kind of an example. There's also going to be our transverse Mercator, if we can find that. Yeah. Let's do height of 70. Come on. Sometimes this tool is a little bit glitchy, but, you know, we can play around with it. But then another good example, just to show you real quick. Lambert conformal conic. And so this is a good one if you want to look at something a little bit smaller. So, or actually, let's go to 145, 10. And we're really zoomed out. Let's increase this height to like 60. Good. Let's go centered on 0, maybe. Okay, let's increase the height to 80. This is a horrible projection for this landmass. Like, you can just see, like, this top part here, this area is like, it's kind of weird for it. But, and then if I click auto set parallels, it's a lot better. So now we can go to 10. Let's add it up to 90. Auto set parallels. And there we go. This would be a Lambert conformal conic projection, which, if you remember, conformal is going to be good for forms. So this is going to preserve the rough shape and form of this. And, you know, honestly, it's not a bad projection. So you just kind of have to play around with it. I basically always use the auto set parallels. I think they work pretty well, unless you're trying to get something super duper specific, but I think this is probably the easiest. And you just kind of move around. I kind of recommend figuring out what your lat long is for each center of each continent, and then you can kind of play around with it more easily, look at it in different projections, and then just export the files as you want to, and it works pretty well. So, types of projections. One of my major sources for understanding projections is the Cartography Guide on Map Projections by Axis Maps. As we mentioned already, there are two main categories of maps that we are concerned with, those that preserve one of the three properties we mentioned, and those that find a compromise between them. And this gives us equal area projections that preserve area, conformal projections that preserve form, equidistant projections that preserve certain distances, and compromise projections that sacrifice a little of all three, but keep distortion limited. The type of projection you want really depends on what you want to use the map for and the size or shape of your area of interest. If you want to use a map to determine land area or population density, you will want a projection that will preserve area. If you want to measure distances, something that will preserve distance in the areas you want will be important. If you want a reference map, then preserving form will be beneficial. If you want to use the map for navigational purposes like bearings, straight lines of latitude and longitude would be helpful. Typically, the center of your map is going to be the least distorted, and things in reference to that point will be less distorted than when compared to other parts of the map. Some projections will have a standard line and or center coordinates, which will be the least distorted areas of the map, and this should be the center of your area of interest. If you're using a projection which takes two standard lines, the best practice is to use them to divide your area of interest into thirds to minimize distortion. We will walk through the different general scales of interest areas and what maps or what map projections you may want to use. For a global map, there are a few good options. If you want an atlas-style map that will show you two hemispheres, you can go with an azimuth equal area or equidistant two-hemisphere projection. The edges of these maps will be more distorted than the centers. And then the Robinson is a good compromise projection that will be easy to reference and understand. If you want something funky, Mulwade with interruptions is like peeling open an orange and laying it flat, but you can choose a pattern of interruption that allows major areas of interest to be maintained. Supercontinents and continents. When we don't want to view the entire globe but still want to view a pretty large land area, here are some good projections to consider. Azimuthal equal area or equidistant, good projections for very large areas such as supercontinents that take up the majority of one half of your globe. This is essentially one half of the two hemisphere option we discussed for the global map. It is pretty common for pole-centered landmasses, like Antarctica on Earth. Transverse Mercator, good conformal projection for medium areas over 50 degrees in height that stretch north to south but are not very wide. Albers equal area conic and Lambert conformal conic are good projections for areas that stretch east-west and are in the mid-latitude, so around 20 to 60 degrees, but are not very tall. Orthographic projection, good projection for larger areas where you can fit the entire area of interest within a 60-degree radius of the center point, though ideally within 30 to 40 degrees of the center point. This is a compromise projection that doesn't preserve anything, but has a natural sphere-esque look to it. Regional maps. Albers equal area conic and Lambert conformal conic are good for showing regional maps in mid-latitudes, around 20 to 60 degrees, especially those that stretch more east to west. Azimuthal equal area or equidistant are good projections for more small-scale maps as well, particularly over the poles. Mercator, good projection for equatorial areas, pretty well preserved within 15 degrees of the equator, but decent within 50 degrees. Robinson, another good projection in areas around the equator, pretty well preserved within 15 degrees of the equator, but decent within 45 degrees. Equidistant conic, good projection for areas with few degrees of latitude that do not cross the equator. Let's move on to making projections for our landmasses. So my maps include 5 major continents, and we will consider the conditions for creating the best projection for each one. Because most of my continents are massive, we will also consider the peninsula archipelago region on the southernmost continent as well. Alright, landmasses number 1 and number 2. Both of these landmasses have more north-south land area than east-west, landmass number 1 in particular. They are both quite large though, over the 50-degree height limit for the transverse Mercator projection in G.Projector. An orthographic projection would work well enough for both of these areas. Remember, we want to be within a 60-degree radius of the center point, ideally within 30 to 40 degrees of the center point for this projection. Landmass number 1 is almost within a 40-degree radius of the center, and landmass number 3 is within 45 degrees of the center, so it'll work. The azimuthal equal area projections also work well for these landmasses, simply due to how large they are. Alright, landmass number 2. This landmass is much larger east-west than north-south, but it is extremely large. It is hard to find a really good projection for this landmass. Our best bets are probably the Albers equal area conic or Lambert conformal conic projection. It doesn't like the orthographic projection here, but I will show it just as an example. Alright, landmass number 4. For this smaller continent, which is more north-south running, we can do a transverse Mercator. This land area is just under 30 degrees in height, so it is under the 50-degree height limit for this projection in G.Projector. An orthographic projection would be fine as well, although less ideal. This is perhaps too big of a land area for a equidistant conic projection, but it doesn't look bad either. Landmass number 5. This landmass is relatively even north-south and east-west, and it is mostly centered around the South Pole. While it is large, it is small enough that you could use an orthographic projection pretty well. But an azimuthal equal area or equidistant are good choices for polar landmasses. Choose either depending on what you want to preserve. Area number 6. This peninsula and archipelagos is a mainly east-west area, a smaller portion of landmass number 5. This is much too small of an area to use an orthographic projection. We can use an Albers equal area conic projection if we care more for preserving area, or a Lambert conformal conic projection if we care more for preserving form. At this scale, they are pretty indistinguishable. When moving on to local and regional maps, I find creating these kinds of projections incredibly useful. They help me measure distances, determine population sizes, and draw less distorted regional maps. There are undoubtedly other projections that are useful. I encourage you to do your own research and play around with the options. Again, I choose to use G.Projector, and it has a limited set. While it is a very large set, and if you get in there and scroll around, there's a lot. You could spend a lot of time in there, but it is limited. However, for these uses of drawing maps, I find that the standard set that's in there is more than efficient, and I don't use half the stuff that's in there anyway. So yeah, if there's any other things you want to recommend or ask about with these projections, go ahead and post that down below. And yeah, if you've watched this and liked it, appreciated it, whatever, do the whole like, comment, subscribe, whatever thing. I have a Ko-fi linked below if you want to support the channel. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.